My name is Paul Stapleton. I'm an associate professor at the Education University of Hong Kong. I'm also the associate dean of the graduate school and the head of the Department of English Language Education. Globalization to me means, I think, we have two levels of globalization. One is the visible level, things like, just for example, containerization, where products are shifted around the world, exports and imports, duties, tariffs, this sort of thing. That's on the economic level. On the political level, you also have the United Nations and the meetings of countries and so forth. And we could run through a whole list of levels and criterias. But on another level, there's a way of thinking. And this way of thinking in terms of having open mind towards peoples from other countries, other nationalities, other cultures. So those are, to me, are two levels that I look at when I think of globalization. One is sort of the surface level. The other is the level of how people interact and understand each other. I think in terms of students in general, I think because there's a whole new world that's opening up in terms of competitiveness, whereas even as much as little as a decade ago, or maybe 2 decades ago, where our students, not particularly education students, but just students in general, didn't feel that they'd be competing against the world after they graduate. But now, because of looser borders, because of the internet and jobs advertised around the world, our students really need to be aware that there's a whole new reality out there, and that certainly in certain professions like education where you need local qualifications, yes, you're not necessarily competing against the world to a full extent, but even to a partial extent. I think there are possibilities for people from outside of Hong Kong, say, to come in here and become qualified, whereas before this is something that was less likely because of the sharing of information. As far as education students are concerned, well, just the awareness of what's going on in other countries, because I've read articles in education that have suggested that there will be subjects that are taught by experts overseas, and within a decade or two, there's a possibility that via video and course packages, it's always possible that our students will have to compete against that, or have to be knowledgeable about the sorts of curriculums and teaching methods that are used that right now we may not even be able to imagine the types of competition that could come in. So I think, just in general, to answer that question, competition is something that has really been ramped up over the last decade or two, and particularly within the last few years. And so I'm not completely sure that our students are aware of this as they may need to be. One thing I do is I teach a course that has quite a few foreign students. And there is a tendency for foreign students and local students and even mainland students to cluster among themselves for obvious reasons. There's the language, there's cultural expectations, and so forth. So in one of the courses that I teach, I actually force them into groups where there are Cantonese speakers, for example, or non-Mandarin speakers. I do it by language because the foreign students come from several different countries, and also mixed gender as well. So in each group of 4 or 5 students, as a necessary condition, they have to be in a group with mixed gender, mixed languages. And generally, I can manage to do that because there'll be enough foreign students. So the reason why I do this is just to expose and force them to communicate in a language that generally is not their native language. That's one reason. But another reason is just to expose them to different ideas, because the foreign students generally are from continental Europe, and they have very, very different expectations, very, very different outlooks towards how to work in a group, and forcing them to get along with each other. So it goes beyond globalization. It in a sense, it goes towards working well together with humans of other cultures and languages. So that's one thing I feel I can do in the course that's practical. But in terms of the curriculum itself, the course curriculum or the course content, I would say I have not consciously tried to implement or instill something that's necessarily global. Partly because perhaps I just haven't thought about it, or perhaps I've thought sort of unconsciously that it's already there to some extent by virtue of me teaching the course from my own outside viewpoint. It's all over the map. You get students, local students born here, but they've been exposed through travel or through their own family experiences, if they're not Chinese, to having a much more global perspective. I would say certainly compared to, say, 20, 30 years ago, you have students, a significant number of students who will have traveled already to 3 or 4 different continents and will think nothing of a trip, a 12-hour trip to Europe on the airplane. This is because they've done it several times. Whereas, a generation earlier, and even for the vast majority of the Hong Kong population that either doesn't go to university or doesn't have the means, they would not have that exposure. So that's why I say it's all over the map. You get students who have never, whose big life experience has been 24 hours in Macau. And on the other hand, you get students who have traveled to several continents, or even have spent a semester in high school overseas. So it's hard to pin down. We do have both exchange programs and immersion programs, and certainly the immersion program, which is held annually, and it's either a semester in an overseas university, usually in an English-speaking country, or a summer abroad experience, and we're shifting to the semester experience again. This tends to be, I would say, and based on students' reports back to me, a defining experience for them. This is their signature event in 5 years, and this is something that they, 3 or 4 years on, it's what they recall most immediately. And so the types of anecdotal reports that I hear will be descriptions of going into schools there, maybe even helping a teacher teaching a class, and many comments about the differences over there with smaller classes, more informal classes. Students tend to be more active. Certainly, these are the sorts of comments that I hear, and it certainly has an impact on our students. They remember this, and almost to a student. It's the experience that they will say they gained the most from their 5 years. I can't really comment because then you get into budgets and you get into certainly you get into credit points. And this is something we had to really struggle in order to make this semester experience possible, because once you have a set curriculum here, and once you suddenly take a semester out of that, then students have difficulty completing the program within 5 years. So there are institutional constraints, curriculum constraints, and I don't want to be critical of the university. I think there is an international office. They're doing their best to encourage students to take the initiative to go on exchange themselves. This is given a high priority, and certainly in the university 10-year plan, internationalization is front and center. So whether the university is doing enough or not, this is hard for me to say, but certainly the efforts are being made, and in terms of the key performance indicators, it's high on the list. I can only comment on the activities that I see, just on the posters and in the central square and so forth. And they'll have, I think last year they had some sort of activity where they were cooking food from their own country, that sort of thing. So I think that raises the awareness to a certain extent, but in my position, it's very difficult to quantify or measure improvements or changes that happen over a number of years. But just, as you say, anecdotally or just from casual observation, it does seem that there are more opportunities and more activities. Well, just returning to what I said at the beginning, that there's a whole new level of competitiveness, I think, that's arriving, and we hear so much about disappearing jobs, and I'm not convinced that teaching will not be affected by this. That was a double negative there. I am convinced that teaching will be affected by this competitiveness in some way or another. And I think that our students really have to stay on top of the changes in technology that are entering the classroom. And some of these changes are arriving from best practices that often come from overseas. So in that sense, it's a global environment. And so, yeah, that's what stands out to me the most. I think people have made efforts, but I'm not sure that the technology is quite there yet. I think what will happen is you'll have packages of, star teachers, teachers that can really communicate well, and you ask yourself, if you can have this star, a world-class teacher who's right there on the screen in front of you, is this something that will take over in the future? We all know about MOOCs, for example, now, massive open online courses, and they have not disappeared as some have predicted. So one wonders what the next step is and whether these MOOCs will start to charge money. I think some of them have already become credit oriented and charging tuition fee. So one wonders what's the next step after that. And I think all teachers should be aware of this. Well, I think there'll be structural impediments in the sense that we're on a 24-hour clock, and if we want interaction globally, I already experience this I would say on a monthly basis, where I'm doing interviews or vivas where I have to arrive here at 8 o'clock in the morning or stay after 6 in the evening, just because the external examiners are in a different time zone. So there's that has to be overcome. And then there's also the whole element of learning styles. And some learners are quite happy just being on their own without interaction, whereas others really need that classroom interaction. So how does the technology get around that? And how do the curriculums make compromises so that all of the learners get the maximum benefit from their course experience?